Hi everybody, and thanks for joining us. We have come together today to hopefully give you some really insightful information about coming out post-pandemic, being successful, seeking investment, tax structuring, just really empowering your business for the future. And I'm really lucky to be joined by Stephen Hemmings today, who's from a very, very good tax and accounting practice. But let me hand you over to introduce himself. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Karen. Hello, everyone. I'm a tax partner at Menzies, as Karen indicated. I specialise in working with clients and businesses who are in a high growth cycle, really, and advising them on the best tax strategies, how to get the best tax efficiencies out of their structure, and also obtain the tax reliefs that are available, and work with them alongside as they grow, and hopefully achieving a successful exit eventually as well.
And I'm Karen Holden. I'm the founder of a city law firm. So we're based in Liverpool Street. So we pretty much work for startup businesses, those growing, mergers, acquisitions. And we'll also work in a lot of innovative space. If you have a technology company, whether it's drones or AI, we're very much hot on those subjects and redrafting your policies, helping you with investment. The idea today is give you as much information as we can. But, obviously, like me, Steve's happy to have a chat with you if you'd like to get in touch with us. Happy to send you our slides. Please do interact with us. Obviously now with the world virtual, it's easy to get hold of us and hopefully even more cost efficient than traveling down to us. So we do hope you will contact us. Steve's going to go through his presentation, then myself. We have a lot of questions that people have asked up front, which I'd like to ask of Stephen. And then we'll obviously do like our own little questions and answer session. But, if we don't cover anything, please do feel free to contact us. So Steve has prepared this presentation, so you have control of the screen. If not, I'll move it for you.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, that's working for me now, I think. So yeah, what I wanted to talk about today was to run through a number of different issues. Firstly, just a bit of a look at debt versus equity. What are the practical benefits of each? What are the tax differences between them? And then after that, really focus on some tax structuring. Looking at the enterprise investment scheme, which really is the key scheme for investors into high growth companies. And then after that, also talk a bit about the R&D tax relief scheme, which is great for getting cash into the company. And then finally, the share option scheme for incentivizing employees, known as EMI. So firstly, we'll look at debt versus equity, the commercial differences between the two and some of the tax considerations as well. So the obvious thing really is that debt funding provides flexibility for a lender. So unlike equity and subject to the loan agreement, it's a lot easier for them to get their cash back out of the company. Whereas if you make a share investment, it's stuck there in the company until a later event, such as a sale or redemption event. From the company and existing shareholders' perspective, there's no dilution of their interest in the company. They're just receiving some funding to help them, possibly on a short-term basis, and not actually diluting their real value in the company. Equity, by contrast, is potentially cheaper for a company, so it's beneficial from that perspective. There's no interest or arrangement fees, for example. And equity itself also encourages long-term buy-in to a company. So as I suggested, the money stays in the company for a longer period, which can be good for all concerned, helps you build a partnership. Often we see investors working alongside the company and providing their advice and insight into it. So it encourages that sort of longer term behaviour. Equity also provides a stronger balance sheet. So this can be useful from a commercial perspective. If you're looking at contracts with customers or even talking to a bank, to have a stronger balance sheet is often a really positive thing. The equity obviously boosts the balance sheet, whereas the debt's shown as a liability. From a tax perspective, if you're charging interest on a debt, that debt should be tax deductible. The same with any arrangement fees or other costs. So you do get some tax benefit there at the corporation tax rate of 19%. By contrast, the returns you get on shares are dividend based, and a company doesn't get a deduction for those dividend returns. If you're looking at equity investment, the key thing to consider is enterprise investment scheme and whether you qualify for that. And that's something I'll focus on in the coming slides. If not, then entrepreneurs relief might be available. This effectively reduces the tax rate down from 20% on exit down to 10%. And the key things to think about in terms of qualifying for entrepreneurs relief are you need to own more than 5% of a business, it needs to be a trading business, you also need to hold the shares for a 2-year period, and importantly, you need to be an employee or director for that period as well. There are other conditions, but those are the main ones to consider. So it's always important to think about these things at the initial stage of a business to make sure that you can maximize the benefit going forward. So as a sort of summary, thinking about the practicalities, I think debt really is useful as a short-term venture for a business to get cash in for a particular project or transaction, whereas equity really is about long-term growth and partnerships. But the existing shareholders have to be comfortable in the equity that they're giving away because they're giving it away in the long term. So if we move on to looking in more detail about the enterprise investment scheme. So the enterprise investment scheme, it really is a great scheme for external investors. And from a company's perspective, it really does encourage investment into them with the tax reliefs that are available. So in the last year recorded under HMRC statistics, nearly 4,000 companies raised 1.8 billion under the scheme. And the scheme was launched in the 90s and it's raised 22 billion in total. Significant tax reliefs are available, which I'll focus on in a second, but it's also considerably complex. And it's really important that companies get the right advice around this scheme because HMRC's own approach to it is very prescriptive and unforgiving. What I'm going to look at in the next 3 slides is the different stages of EIS investment. Firstly, the point that the money goes into the company and how things work there, then looking at the employment of funds, and finally exit considerations. So the first thing to consider is enterprise investment scheme, or its smaller sibling, the seed enterprise investment scheme. So the EIS scheme itself for the investor provides 30% income tax relief upfront, and provided that the shares are held for 3 years, capital gains tax-free exit. So this can mean, say, for example, if you spend £100,000 on an investment, you can get £30,000 of income tax relief back immediately. And then if you sell for £200,000, say, you don't pay any additional tax on that £100,000 gain. SEIS is for very early stage companies. To qualify for that, you have to be within the first 2 years of your life cycle, have gross assets under £200,000, and the maximum investment that can be made in total is £150,000. EIS, by contrast, is much bigger than that. So you can raise 5 million a year under EIS, for example. So what we typically see is for early stage businesses who are trying to raise, say, £500,000, they'll market it under both SEIS and EIS to encourage investors in as quickly as possible to say the first £150,000 of investment will qualify for SEIS. So that's a worthwhile tool to bear in mind. There's a number of conditions to qualify for the schemes. The sort of main obvious one is there's a trading requirement for the company or group. It has to be trading and not carrying on investment activities. Within this, there are some excluded trades. For example, things like financial services, accountancy activities, operating hotel establishments or nursing homes. And also the generation of energy is now specifically excluded as well. And that's because the government feels that sector gets a lot of other benefits from HMRC. So that's now excluded. In terms of time limits, so we've already mentioned SEIS. For EIS, a company has to receive investment within its first 7 years after its first trade. So you've effectively got 7 years to raise under EIS, otherwise it's lost. The main exemption from this criteria is where you've already raised some capital under a venture capital HMRC approved scheme, in which case it doesn't matter then. You can carry on, you can have further investment after 10 years, 14 years, etc. We always recommend that people get an assurance from HMRC before they actually raise the investment. And this actually is something that you can then show to the investor to say, HMRC has said your investment should qualify for EIS or SEIS. So therefore, you've got the confidence that when you put the money in, this relief will be available. Now, HMRC have become stricter and stricter in terms of how they apply EIS anyway, and also whether they give these assurances. You need to make sure when you do this assurance that you have a clear business plan. You really emphasize that the money is going to be spent on the growth and development of the company, and demonstrate why, how many extra people are you employing, what assets are you having to buy, what's your expansion policy. And you need to demonstrate that the money will be spent within a 2-year period as well. And there's also a lot of other criteria which need to be met, and it's important to have a good advisor that can tell you where there might be a slight risk area, how you can write this and present it to HMRC to demonstrate to them that you will fit within the rules. Just worthwhile noting that at the moment only 62% of these assurances are actually being approved by HMRC. If we now look at the next stage, the employment of funds. So as I alluded to, the money has to be employed within a 2-year period. Now, I did talk about spent on the last slide, but actually for EIS, the distinction is slightly different. If the money is earmarked for expenditure, and you can clearly demonstrate this for a particular project, and you can set out exactly how it will be spent and that numbers involved, then you can argue that you're still within the rules, even if the cash hasn't gone out of your bank account within the 2 years. What we always say is, if you can, it's best to spend the money, and then there's no concerns about whether you could fall in these rules. But it's just worth knowing that if you are getting to within 2 years and you haven't spent the funds, that you can still plan to fall within the rules. So the money has to be invested in either a standalone company or a group. And within a group, it has to be the holding company where the money is invested and where the shares are issued. The holding company doesn't actually have to be a UK company, which people don't always realise, but it does have to have some presence in the UK. So that would be, for example, an office in the UK or another permanent establishment of some sort. And the money then has to be spent by the holding company and any 90% subsidiaries that it's got. And actually, I've seen quite a few cases where companies have 75% subsidiaries, 60% subsidiaries, and they've actually spent the money in those and not actually met the correct criteria. From a practical perspective, in terms of demonstrating that the money has been employed or spent, it's always useful, I think, to have a separate bank account or sub-bank account to actually be able to demonstrate that the money has gone out and the expenditure hasn't been out of working capital, for instance. And also you can show exactly where it's been spent. And again, this needs to be on the growth and development of the business, not just general sort of ongoing activities. So if we then move on to exit considerations, the key thing to note here is that you need to meet the conditions for EIS for 3 years. If you breach the conditions, then not only do you miss out on the capital gains free exit, but even worse, you actually have a reclaim of the income tax relief that you've already claimed. Obviously, if you're a company, it's not going to look too good if something happens, which means that the money's clawed back, the tax is clawed back from the investors. So it's really important to make sure that the various conditions are managed over a 3-year period. Within this, a few things to consider are any pre-arranged exits within the 3-year period actually fall foul of the rules. So, for example, if you were to issue share options within the 3-year period to a third party to say you can buy these shares off me after the 3 years, you'd still be caught by these rules. We also often see situations where a company or group goes through a restructuring whereby a holding company is put above the existing company or group. In very limited circumstances, you can roll over the EIS attributes of the existing shares into a new holding company, but the rules are very tight here. So they only apply if the new hold company has exactly the same shareholdings, holding the same proportions, and no cash leaves the group as a result of the restructuring. There's not many circumstances that fit into that criteria. So I think in summary, with the EIS scheme, it's a great scheme, and I always feel that investors actually look for this and almost require it now for a lot of their investments, and having that assurance really does give that give that substance to it and helps the company. But the rules are so complex that you do need actually good advice to make sure that you get it right. The next thing to mention is the research and development tax relief scheme, and the reason I emphasize this is because of the cash benefit that it can bring to early stage businesses who maybe haven't even generated turnover. So the scheme basically gives 230% tax relief to companies that the government feels are innovating in some way. And the default for this is that you generate a loss in your tax return, which is then carried forward against future profits. But the really good thing is that this can be converted into a cash credit. When it's converted into a cash credit, it allows you to potentially claim around £33 back of £100 of qualifying expenditure. So you get a third of your money back that you spent on innovation. It's also important to remember that you can actually, you have 2 years to make a claim. So if we look at it practically, if you have a company with a 30th of September year end, you can still make a claim for September 18 and September 19 expenditure if you haven't already. So you can go back 2 years and make 2 years worth of claims. In terms of the criteria, the main thing, as I mentioned, is that you're being innovative in some way, and that the people that are undertaking this activity have the appropriate expertise to do so. So you're working on something, you've identified a problem, and you're trying to find a way to work around it. It doesn't even have to be a product like a piece of software or something. It can be a process or design as well. Even if you don't, as an end result, solve the particular problem, the costs involved in it are still deductible for this tax relief. It's worth noting that it doesn't have to be a successful expenditure. I mean, from a practical perspective, what we found is that this relief can be claimed on a very wide-ranging basis. So we have companies who specialize in things like software development, building platforms, bespoke platforms to sell products, integrating different parts of software together. They've all claimed R&D tax relief, and perhaps they're some of the more obvious ones. At the same time, we've also had perfume businesses, craft beer, a company that designed a toilet to fit into new EU standards in a train, architects in terms of some glass and the structure behind the glass that they actually created. So it really is wide ranging. The important thing is that you can provide evidence to support your claim. Typically this is done with a report setting out the projects that you've undertaken, who's worked on them, and the salary costs of those employees. In addition, it can also be subcontractors. It's not just employees themselves as well. You get a slightly lower rate for subcontractors, but the relief is generally still available. HMRC's attitude is quite a positive one towards this relief. If you put in a claim with your tax return, it's generally a matter of weeks before they provide the cash credit back to you, and it's in the company's bank account. So it is a really positive scheme. Then look at one last point, the Enterprise Management Incentive Scheme. So this is where you issue share options to employees as a means of incentivizing them and retaining them in the business. This is typically very useful for high growth companies where they've got a high cash burn rate. They're not necessarily able to pay bonuses or the same level of bonuses that a larger, more established company would be able to. But what they can say to their employees is, we really think there's some value in this company, and it's going to grow a lot in the next few years, and you can have a piece of that if you stay with us. So how EMI effectively works is that you agree a value of the underlying shares with HMRC, and then you issue the employee with options. And the exercise price of those options is typically the value that you've agreed with HMRC. And that value is normally heavily discounted to reflect the fact that the employee will just be having a minority holding, won't have really any say over running the company or voting rights, that sort of thing. And then that value is frozen in time. And when the employee acquires the shares and then sells them on, they just need to pay that value to ensure that they're not subject to any income tax on the value they receive. And the difference between what they pay and what they ultimately get when they sell the shares in future is only subject to tax at 10%. By contrast, if you'd received a bonus or even unapproved options, you would be paying tax as an employee of up to 47%, and the company would also have 13% of the employer's NIC. So it is really a no-brainer from a tax perspective. It's also a very commercially flexible scheme. So you draw up the share option agreements and you can put a number of barriers or vesting requirements into the agreements. But typically what we find is that it works best when it's done on a simple basis, so everyone can understand what they're getting out of it, and the employees themselves can feel that it's achievable as well. And this is normally where you have an exit-only scheme. So the employee gets the options and they can only actually exercise them and receive shares as part of a wider sales event. At that point, they exercise the shares and then sell them along with the existing shareholders. This is good from the company's perspective because they're not giving away any sort of control, voting rights, rights to dividends, etc., in their own time of ownership of the company. And from an employee's perspective, they don't need to pay out any cash to acquire the shares. They can actually pay the cash out of the proceeds that they receive at the same time as part of that mechanism. As I mentioned, it's very tax efficient. And probably the best way to demonstrate this and how it works is through a worked example. The next slide sets this out for us. So this is broken into 3 stages: the option issue, the exercise of the shares, and then the sale of the shares. So at the time of the option issue, you've got a company that's worth £10 million and you issue options over 1% of the equity. So the gross value of this equity and what you'd receive if you sold the shares to a third party would be 100,000. But at this point, you can agree a value with HMRC incorporating a minority discount of, say, around 30,000. You've got a 70% minority discount there. So already at this point, there's a built-in £70,000 of value for the employee. There's no immediate tax implications from the option issue, and they carry on holding them. EMIs can be held for a 10-year period before they expire. In this example, what we're saying is there's a wider sales event in 3 years' time. So at this point, the company is actually worth £40 million. The shares are exercised immediately before a sale. There's no cash outlay for the employee because, as I said, they'll pay the exercise price out of the proceeds they receive immediately. There's no income tax or NIC implications for them on exercise. And the company also receives a corporate tax deduction. And this corporate tax deduction is the difference between what the shares are worth, 400,000, and what they pay for them, 30,000. So you get a corporate tax deduction of £370,000, and the sort of cash tax value of that is £70,000. So the company receives a benefit as well. And then the shares are sold by the employee for 400,000. Because entrepreneurs relief of 10% applies, this wouldn't normally apply unless you held 5% of the shares, but there's an exemption for EMI shareholders, provided they've held the options for 2 years. And the employee then receives net 333,000. So if they hadn't set up and built an EMI scheme, then actually they would have suffered a lot more tax if they'd received a bonus or unapproved option, and they would have only received net around 196,000. So you can see a real benefit there. So EMI, what we found is it's a really great scheme. It works best if it's simple. Employees understand it, and employees can see how they can benefit from it. So hopefully those 3 areas have provided some insight for you on the types of things that Menzies can help with, and really the types of things that are important to a high growth company in terms of ensuring they've got cash there, both from investors and the R&D tax credit, and also retaining their best employees as well to work with them on the growth cycle that they're involved in. So that's my presentation. So I'll pass you back to Karen.
Thanks, Steve. There's a lot of information in there, so hopefully those slides are going to be really helpful to people. And, you know, I mean, paying for a tax advisor, you know, it's not an outlay of money, it's saving you such a lot of money. That example was really insightful, actually. So, you know, hopefully people understand you pay a bit of money to get some really concrete advice, but you're saving them a fortune. We're going to have some questions for Steve, but I'll run through my presentation and then perhaps we can do that together, if that's all right with you, Steve.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So my side of the presentation is obviously whether you're taking an investment, and we've already discussed the benefits of equity investment, or whether you're going to do a stack structure such as CIS, SEIS, or even whether you're just growing. You need to get yourself investment ready. You can't just rely on what the investors want. You can't rely on just answering their questions there and then. Being prepared is always the way to go. So what would a lawyer or a tax advisor do? Well, apart from obviously the tax structuring, we would work with Steve very much on finding out what's best for you and the company, and then would work around that. So we would look at reviewing your structure and your shares, and that's not just from a tax point of view, but legally as well. Are there husbands and wives attached to the company for tax purposes? Let's slim that down for investors. Let's look at if there's any red flags. Perhaps you've allocated the shares incorrectly. Perhaps you haven't allocated the share certificates. And we do find these even in very large established businesses. So I think it's quite key that we do run through that carefully. Then you've obviously got, do you own your own IP? So it's very important to understand that IP that you create is owned by you. But if you've hired third parties and they're developing your IP, it will only pass in writing. So you need a good, robust agreement that is very clear that you own it, and there isn't such terms that it'll only pass upon payment or they reserve any rights. That's what investors are going to look at to make sure that their money is tied up in your business, and that's the collateral. So we'll register the trademarks. If it's patentable or copyright designs, we'll look at that. But also we'll be very clear to make sure that you fully own that with staff and with third parties. We're trying to keep things simple. The more concise you deliver to the investor, the more transparent you are, the better you are to get investment. So if you have overcomplicated structures with several parties or offshore trusts or various jurisdictions or very clever tax schemes, it can put people off, because not only do they get nervous about the complexity, they have to delve down and carry out real due diligence on that. There are genuine reasons why you would do that, and we'll help you structure that. And you can actually do a very good executive summary to explain that's what you've done and why, and reassure an investor. But the more simple and the more concise you can be, the better. We also need to make sure that in your shareholders agreement and in the way that you approach an investor, you are all as founders singing from the same hymn sheet. There's no good getting in a room and having a discussion about whether you're selling in 3 or 5 years. What happens if one of you wants to leave? Which direction of the company do you want to go? You have to have those very, very difficult conversations now. You have to document that in a shareholders agreement. And you have to be under no illusion that an investor is going to ask you some tough questions, and you've got to be concise together. How much control are you willing to give away? Are you willing to sell if the investor wants to sell? How are you going to repay their money if they want to leave at year 3? What if one of you wants to leave or the other one wants to sell and the other one doesn't? Have those conversations in private. Have your lawyer draft up agreement to make sure it's all protected in the shareholders agreement, and go to the investor together, united. It really is key, as I've seen deals fall apart as soon as the founders start disputing terms in front of an investor. Be prepared for the tough questions. You have to go with the detail to evidence the facts and figures you're giving, but not everything will be there on the paper. You've got to be ready to answer. Don't do the body language that you don't want to tell them. If they're giving you constructive criticism, take it. These people are investing their livelihoods in you. They know what they're doing, very often have experience. You're going to have to be prepared to understand their questions and their critique. And transparency is everything. If you're going to work together, you're going to take their money, you've got to be honest with each other. So there is a problem with the business or a mistake has been made, be honest. They'll find it when they do their due diligence. So you being upfront, tackling it head on, and having that on the honest conversation will help you immediately, and it'll set the tone for your relationship going forward. GDPR, data protection, make sure you've got the correct policies, you've got the right processes. Investors are not going to invest their money and look to engage in a company unless they've really got robust policies. Penalties are coming now. People are actually being chastised for the way they're operating. You need to show that you're ready and you're compliant. But also do the due diligence on them. Do they actually have the money and the experience they say they do? Are they working with other competitors? In which case, are they kind of covering their bets, which is not good for you? What if they up and leave because they seem to move around different companies one after the other? Do they really understand you and your business? Are their goals aligned to you? Do not be afraid to ask them tough questions. And your lawyer and your tax advisor will also do some digging with them just to make sure they are who they say they are. Do not be afraid to do that. Pitch deck. So you do not want to go in with reams and reams and reams of paperwork. You don't want to give all your trade secrets away. You don't want to give all your finances straight away. You want to know, are they right for you? Are they interested in you? And you want to tease them and give them enough information to want to have that second conversation. And under an NDA, if possible, or in a private forum, that's when you have the deliverance of your information. So what would you put in a pitch deck? So for me, the first and foremost, what I see many of my clients want to know is, who are you? What experience and credentials do you have, not only in the product you're selling or the services you're providing, but to run a business? Do not underestimate your skills, your experience selling you. If you've run a multinational company, put it in. If you bought and sold a company previously, put it in. If you've got friends and family who have invested time and money in you, put that in, because people are supporting you. Show what experience you are bringing to the table, as well as all the other people that are involved. If you've got a really good law firm behind you, say that, because that actually reassures the investor you've taken the time and the money and the energy to get this right. You might have a strong board. They're not engaged, they're not paid, but they are supporting you. Put that in. If you've got revenue coming through, put that in. Show everything about who you are and why you are a strong team to be reckoned with. The next slide is usually what problem you're looking to solve and how you are the solution. But don't be afraid to put out who your competitors are. And we do hear it time and time again, we don't have any competition. There is nobody out there doing what we do. It's very hard to say nowadays. There's always someone trying to do what you're doing, or someone in your space. So don't be afraid to tell the investors who they are, but then you tell them what your unique selling point is, why they should invest in you and not them. That will give them transparency. It will reassure them that you understand the marketplace and that you're engaging with them on the right terms. Then you need to do your financials. So how are you going to spend their money? It's not fair to simply say it's your salary or it's marketing. Be very clear on exactly what you're spending their money on and what you think it will achieve. If you're going to spend £10,000 on marketing to Europe, what will that achieve? Will it break 3 new jurisdictions and therefore bring 2,000 clients? If you're going to spend £50,000 on a financial director, what's that financial director going to achieve for the investors' money and your company? Be very clear. What's the exit strategy for their money? Are you selling in 3 years? Are you bringing in further investment to dilute them? Are you merging with another company? What's the exit plan? They want to know that their money will be useful for the company to grow, that they will make profit out of it, but also how are you giving them back their return? Everybody asks me, and I know Steve gets this all the time, how do I value my company? There are so many ways of doing this. You can pay thousands of pounds putting it all in paperwork. You can pretty much do this. The most important thing that I've seen is that you're realistic about your valuation and you back it up. If you are going to say it's worth X, show them how you got there, show them the details and the figures and the calculations, and be damned clear that you can support exactly what you're saying, because they will drill down on that. You can't say it's worth this now, but we know it's going to be worth 3 times the amount with your money without unsubstantiated evidence. This is the bit that people do fall down on. If you ask for too much, they will walk away. But likewise, if you ask for too little, they won't take you seriously that you're going to pay your mortgage and survive during this process. So be very clear what you're asking for, how you're going to sustain you and your business, what their money is going to achieve, how you're going to return it, and how you've evaluated it all. Be savvy, therefore. Don't throw loads and loads and loads of facts and figures, but be concise. Be prepared to answer their questions transparently and back it up with evidence, paperwork. Therefore, you get really good sound advisors around you, whether it's a tax advisor now or a finance director. Make sure you can produce those records. Show that you own your IP. Provide those documents, provide the reservation certificates. If you have a pattern and you can't afford to register, explain that. But again, explain what you're going to do about it. Be transparent, but don't go in with thousands of pages. Be concise. So look in the mirror. If an investor is going to invest his money or her into you, what are they going to be looking for? So you're going to need good, concise legal advice, something that they know they don't have to redo. They don't have to go through the quagmire and find the red flags. You've been clear, you've been upfront, it's there. Good financial information. Don't make them beg for it. Don't make them question what you do and don't have. Have it available for them. Produce the documentary evidence as to how you've got there with your facts, your figures and valuation. Even if they don't agree and they want to question that, you've got a really good foundation as to how you got there and why. As I've already said, be transparent. The more honest and open you are, the more likely they are to engage in you. Have an exit plan, not just for yourself and the business, but for the investor. Do you and your founders want to sell in 5 years? Have you discussed that? Does the investor want to wait to take out his money for that payback? Be very clear that you're all singing from the same hymn sheet. You do not want the disparity of 2-3 years in. Who's leaving? How do we get our money out? That's very disruptive for the business. Make sure you've got budget so you know what money may come in, you know how you're going to spend it. But you do need your own salaries, your own mortgage payments need to be made. Salaries, marketing, be very clear on your budgeting structure. And if you don't know how to do that, get someone on board to do that. So an investor will want to know that you've got an eye for that. Now, not everyone can run out and take on 10 employees to actually produce the services or the product you want. So you have to be creative. Steve's already touched on EMI. You don't actually have to pay full salaries. You could look at options. You look at triggers and milestones when they get their payments. You can have subcontractors where they only get paid on a project basis or a daily basis, or again, a commission only basis. Look at your talent pool. Who do you need to retain? Who can you have on a project or daily basis? And who can you get in as a third party? If you need a key, say, technology talent pool though, be very careful. They are in demand and they're going to be even more in demand with things the way they are at the moment. How do you retain them? Why don't you look at EMI? If they leave a salary, but if they leave and they lose shares, that's a very different ballgame. If they've got options to acquire ownership in your business and therefore fully engaged to the business, they're motivated to get in the investment. They're motivated to turn the product around quickly. They're motivated to stay and help you. So again, if you can think like that, that will really help springboard your business. And just again, reiterating, make sure all the founders continue to talk, that you're always on the same page. Never have an argument in front of an investor. Try and obviously decide decisions together. But very, very clear. That's your role in the business. This is my role in the business. This is when we both have to agree. This is when we can go off in different directions. You don't want to have a dispute as you go forward. So what do we do and how do we get involved? Well, we're not just commercial lawyers, but we can try and give you actual practical advice as well. Giving you a 70-page document and sending you on your way is not what we do. We want to know you, your goals, your business. We tailor everything around you. So do you want a 1-page terms and condition because you don't want to put clients off? Does it have to be all virtual and online? Or are you so bespoke it needs a really robust 10-page document? We can do all of that with you, holding your hand as to how you want it. The idea is to have a strategy from startup to scale up to taking investment to potentially selling. Thinking about now exactly where you want to be in 5 years' time enables us to help support you on that journey. Things will change. We'll have to amend documents. We'll have to change our strategy with you. But let's have a plan so that we can help you on that journey throughout, rather than just thinking narrowly, this is what you need now, and not thinking of the bigger picture. Therefore, we will work with people like Stephen on a regular basis to make sure that everything we do is complemented by tax advice. We can draft a document, but if you're going to get hit by tax, that is not us supporting you. So again, as I've always said, we make sure that whatever you do is structured carefully, that we make you go and speak to advisors if we know you can save money. Also, we'll help you choose your investors wisely. We'll do the due diligence on them and we'll see if they know the market. We'll see if they've done this before. And we'll make sure that their interests are aligned with you and we'll ask them tough questions. We will be the go-between, negotiating between the two of you to protect you as well. And we won't just sign a shareholders agreement with their money and their check in your hand. We'll protect you. We'll make sure if it doesn't work, you're protected. We'll make sure you don't give up too much control, that you do have restrictive covenants, that they can't just take their shareholding and leave you in the lurch. If you do take on subcontractors and employees, we will make sure that you've got really robust policies and employment contracts to protect you. Drag along and tag along clauses are always advisable in shareholders agreements, so that you're not bound by minority shareholders refusing to allow you to sell or take an investment. You need to be ultimately in control of your destiny. But whilst we want to encourage investors and give them the protection they need, we also want to, again, more so protect the company and the founders throughout. And exit provisions. If you don't like an investor or they want to leave, and vice versa, one of the founders do, we need to have provisions in there very carefully considered so that it doesn't disrupt the company and it doesn't put you into insolvency if you can't agree. If there's a 50-50, we need to have provisions that are carefully thought out to allow the business to continue. These are conversations you might not want to have over your cocktail as you're starting up the business. But unfortunately, as a big bad lawyer, I will come into the room and have those difficult conversations with you so that hopefully you know exactly what page you're both on. And if something does happen, we can jump in quickly, sort it out and move forward. Having the right people on board, whether it's the founders, whether it's investors, whether it's staff, is very key. So I've already alluded to this. You don't just have to have employees. You can have subcontractors and consultants. You can outsource it nowadays to a numerous amount of companies, or you can have employees. But don't be afraid of the immediate expense. Look at options, EMI options. Take tax advice on how you can structure yourself to make sure that you and them save money. They're greater engaged. They're working with you to build the company up because it benefits them. It almost retains them because it's quite hard to leave if they want shareholdings. Understand the IR35, it has been postponed at the moment, but you can't just have somebody as a self-employed consultant if they really are an employee. If you're forcing them to wear a uniform, working certain days, certain hours, be very careful. They will fall under being an employee, and the tax man will look at that. So just be very careful you understand the rules, and we can guide you through that. Pensions and benefits do become an essential part if you hire staff, but it's again now a really good time to audit what you're offering your team to retain them. Maybe with the backlog of NHS, you actually want to give them private healthcare because absenteeism is expensive. Perhaps actually somebody's got a really good package with you is less likely to move for a £2,000 salary increase because the benefits of private healthcare right now are actually more important than the salary. So think savvy what you can offer them to retain them. Obviously, we'll help you with employment rights so you understand the positions, and within your contracts, we will help protect you. So we will make sure they can't walk off with your IP, that you own it. They'll have restrictive covenants so they can't set up in competition with you or take your clients with them or take other staff. We'll need to make sure with home working and flexible working, which is current at the moment, you've got proper cyber security and GDPR policies in place to make sure everyone's engaged and understands the threats and how to look after you and your clients' information. All of these things are tied up in confidentiality, contracts and policies to protect you and your business, as well as offering transparency and engagement to your team. And hopefully we can help facilitate that relationship. A lot of people have asked me, how do we beat our competition, come out on top right now? All the things that we could be doing. Well, I think there's a really good opportunity for many businesses right now. If you are agile and you are flexible, you could really beat the more traditional, stagnant firms out there right now. Staff retention is key. And there are a lot of things you can do, but communication is key. Open the forum about what's concerning them, what your intentions are and what you're doing. The more engaged you are with the team, the more loyal, committed and engaged they'll be with you. And therefore they'll be more productive. They'll be a good brand ambassador. They'll bring clients back and help you build the business. Offering more flexible and remote working does work for a lot of people. You can have them as robust and as tight as possible to protect the business. But having that conversation with them early, again, will make you more of an incentive to stay. New trends and technology. This is a real good time for technology companies right now. The traditional businesses that were maybe going to look at your technology in 3 or 4 years' time need it now. You could actually go in and negotiate more favourable terms, even use your own contracts right now, because they haven't used drones before, but they need it for social distancing. They need AI because so many more people are working from home. We can't afford to close our warehouse, for example, if everybody gets COVID. But if we do a track and trace innovative technology scheme within our own boundaries, If somebody gets COVID, we send those 3 people home, isolate that part of the warehouse, the rest of the team can carry on. But we don't have this technology. We don't know how to integrate this technology. So these new trends, this new innovation, this is the time for you to go in now and actually start innovating with them. Obviously, people are now starting to return to the workspace. So you need a good risk assessment to protect you and to engage people. But perhaps this is the time where people are giving up leases, giving up co-working spaces, and you can actually jump in and get a bargain. Perhaps you can negotiate with the landlords right now that can't afford to keep people, and you could get space for the future. I've got gyms at the moment that are actually being bought up because they know in the future they've saved money buying them. When it relaunches, they're going to make money. So rather than shying away, they are actually spending money. Be agile. Think very much outside the box right now. We've been working very, very innovatively for a long time at a city law firm. So when this happened, we all took our laptops home and worked remotely, and it was this business as usual. If you can now establish that and you're smart enough to do that, you are going to beat all the stragglers in the market. They've only just started to look how they cope during this period. Renegotiate your own contracts, cancellations, more money, milestones. Look at your insurances. You know, now is the time to actually continue with your distributors and suppliers and customers and keep strong and in favour with them, but renegotiate terms if that helps you. So obviously we offer free complimentary chats with businesses who are looking to scale up or take an investment. And it's very important that we understand you and your business and your requirements. We want to make sure that you're comfortable with us. Like I said, we can give you the legal work, but we work with tax advisors to make sure it's efficient. We're innovative to see if there's anything else we can help support you with. But more importantly, we want to give you practical advice that you understand, that works for you, that you can apply, and it's not just legal jargon. We can offer capped and fixed fees, so you have complete transparency, but also we can do payment plans over 12 months. So you budget your expenses, you can call us and email us whenever you need, and we're there pretty much to engage in the whole process. So I would like now perhaps to ask Steve a couple of questions that I think people might want to ask following your presentation, if that's okay.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah.
One of the things is, what do you think right now is the most valuable tax incentive for these high growth businesses?
I think it has to be the R&D tax relief because it's the biggest easy win. There's no additional expenditure for you. You've already spent the money on the qualifying activities, and you get the cash back from HMRC. And as I mentioned, you can go back 2 years for that as well. And in terms of getting support for that, I mean, the way we work and a lot of other advice for that work as well, which gets taken out of the money that comes back. So for a business that hasn't claimed R&D, it's something that's really worthwhile thinking about. One other thing to mention, the enterprise investment scheme obviously is a great thing as well, like I talked about. But for a startup business, you can also use SEIS for the actual founder shareholders as well. And that the benefit for them, even if they're not really putting in any money, maybe £100 of share capital, is they can get a tax-free exit themselves if they fall under the SEIS criteria. So I think behind that is key for businesses, as you were emphasising as well, to get good advice from day one, really, even if cash may be limited. With things like R&D, obviously you can get cash back, so you're not too worried, but even spending a bit of money to make sure everything's set up in the right way really is key.
And I've heard that HMRC are actually sending those checks out quite quickly at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, on the R&D, definitely. I think they've been instructed to do that. Because one thing that's come out of COVID is that the sort of smaller businesses maybe, and with EIS investment, they haven't received an additional benefit for that maybe more larger businesses have received from HMRC. So perhaps with the R&D SME scheme, they're thinking they really do need to get on top of that and support businesses.
It's good news for the businesses.
Yeah.
I mean, have you seen what's happening with your clients at the moment? You know, how's it affected them interacting with you? Is it slowed down, sped up?
Even though everyone's working from home now, we probably had more interaction from them. And obviously everyone now is on video calls. Most of our clients are set up to work agilely as well. Like you, we have a lot of technology sector businesses, so traditionally younger, more flexible businesses anyway. What we've actually found is we've spent a lot of time advising them on the government schemes over the last few months, furloughing their business loans, that sort of thing. So the sort of admin side of things there, supporting them. And whilst they haven't been concentrating so much on growth, helping them out with those aspects. And as they're coming out of COVID, maybe even rationalising their business structures as well, thinking about surplus companies they don't need or moving things around a group, etc. We've been doing quite a lot of that. So we missed out on the face-to-face interaction to a certain extent, but definitely we've been hearing a lot from them anyway the last few months.
I know that a lot of people have been saying to me they can do the EIS on their own. It's a matter of just filling out an application and sending it.
Yeah.
I also know many clients that have done that have come back to me and gone, yeah, it's been rejected. Now what do you do? It's quite complex, right? So what kind of mistakes have you seen? So people do understand if they're going to try it themselves, you know, what risks are they facing? There's
so many pitfalls for it. And what you have to remember is that it's you're not just affecting the company, you're also disadvantaging the investors who you want to work with in the long term. I mean, the types of things that we see are people converting existing loans into shares, which isn't allowed under EIS. Things like practical implementation things, if they're not using a law firm to help them, like issuing shares before the cash is received, not correctly registering the scheme. It sounds like a really obvious thing, but because there is a lot of admin around it, people don't know, if they haven't done it before, exactly what they should be doing. Think they can save a small amount of money by doing it themselves and then not actually correctly registering it. Also, more subtle things like carrying on non-trade activities can sometimes jeopardize them. So, for example, we were doing an insurance for a gym, and HMRC really focused down on the fact they had a small bit of rental income because they were renting out a few rooms for massage treatments and physio work. And they wanted us to demonstrate that this was not significant to the main business, which we were able to do. But if you're not experienced in seeing these things, you're not necessarily able to put that across to HMRC in the right way. And the other thing is sometimes people implement it and then they forget about it as soon as it's implemented. And as I mentioned before, you've got to keep these conditions going for 3 years. Otherwise, you've got a clawback of the benefits you've received.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. People understand you're protecting your investors. Yeah, I have seen a lot of people who failed these and it hasn't worked out well. So I suppose what we're saying is there's a lot of advantages out there, but take proper advice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, look, if anybody has any questions out there for Steve, please email us. I'm going to have the links on the website. If you want a copy of the slides, very happy to send them to you. I think, Steve, I'm not wrong in saying that you offer complimentary chats just to make sure everything.
Yeah, that's right. We're always happy to do that and find out more about people's businesses and give them some sort of initial steering as well. Yeah, and then see how we can help.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I mean, hopefully we've covered quite a lot. I mean, I think, you know, I don't really think we need to go into any more detail unless you think otherwise, Steve, because I think we've been going for quite a while.
No, I don't think so. From our perspective. Yes, yeah, hopefully, yeah. I've got a few questions for you, if that's all right, just to finish things off. So there are a lot of areas that you brought up which are interesting, and I thought there's a focus on people really getting things right and in the right place to start with. One of them being around investment, which you obviously need to really kickstart the company. What do you think are the key legal documents that investors want to see at that point?
Well, obviously they want to know that you own your IP, that you're not going to be held to ransom with that. So it's very key. The shareholders agreement, especially if there's more than one founder, to make sure there's no disputes, that you're in harmony with each other, that any minority shareholders can't obviously sort of disrupt the deal. So I think they're the two principal ones. They have started looking at policies on GDPR, data protection. They want to make sure that that's not going to come later as a problem. The financial documents are key. So again, supporting the facts and figures that you've put forward. So if they've had EIS, the documents and the certificates that you have, they're doing any EMI or any options whatsoever, the paperwork to support that. We're also very, very key to let people know subcontractors and employment contractors, because again, it's about confidentiality, restrictive covenants, IP. Investors will not put their money into a company where 50% of the employees don't have restrictive covenants that could walk out the door. And I have found a lot of handshake deals and it doesn't work. So I I think they're the key essential documents. And then obviously we would look at terms and conditions with the customers, online documents, directors' agreements. But I think essentially what I've mentioned are the core.
So there's a lot there they need to get right, really.
Yeah.
I mean, we see in our client base the most obvious thing having a shareholders agreement in place. The amount of times where we've seen people fall out and not have one in place and then really be stuck.
Especially if they're 50-50, because then if one can't afford to buy out the other, you have to wind down the company. And if one won't relinquish it, sadly the companies have to dissolve. And yes, I see that a lot. And we also get, well, we're husband and wife, we're fine, we're best mates. And I'm like, well, fine, have the difficult conversations now. And if there is a problem in a few years' time, one of you passes away, one of you divorces, one of you wins the lottery, that document will govern how you deal with it. And then it's very transparent. Yeah, so that's key.
That makes sense. Yeah. So I think we've established the sort of need to get really good advice at the start. From a sort of startup's perspective where money's tight, is there a way to secure this good legal advice and support without a huge upfront invoice?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because people are obviously spending the money on their business and their product. And as I said, you get a good tax advisor, you save them a lot of money, you get their R&D, you stretch them. With legals, again, I do understand the problems with that, but downloading templates, not having documents is so dangerous. When things do go wrong, you realise how unprotected you are. So what we're trying to do is almost give people like a 12 to 18 month payment plan. So they pay a lump sum every month that covers all their drafting, the revised documents. We can give them advice by the phone, by meetings. We can help attend investment meetings. Then they've got that budget for the whole period. Some months they won't need us, some months they'll need us a lot, and then we can hopefully budget that out. We're hoping that really helps startups understand it's not all money up front.
And really focusing on the long-term relationship with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also want them to not think it's going to cost me £1,000 to review this document. I won't bother, I'll just sign it, and then problems occur. It's actually, I've paid for this, so I'm going to ask Karen to review it and make some amendments and protect me. And that two-way relationship really, really works. Yeah,
that sounds good. And then we focused on equity investment mostly. What other options are you seeing at the moment that you think it's worth mentioning?
I think a lot of people forget if they're revenue generating, have you actually considered debt? So if you are turning over a good turnover, you could get a short-term loan from the bank, and that could actually give you what you need at the moment. Money and interest rates are really low. So again, don't just think pure equity. Look at the debt financing, look at the revenue you're generating. A lot of people seem to miss that off their pitch deck as well, that they're revenue generating. Even if it's a small sum, you've therefore got a proven concept. That will get you a bank loan. And if you're only asking, say, for £50,000, rather than giving away equity, get a bank loan, pay that £50,000, and then if it jumps up a lot more, then go and seek an investor, because then your value in your business is worth a lot more as well. It's difficult because a lot of people don't want, obviously, the bank loans and the personal guarantees, but then also giving away 10 to 20% of your business sometimes, and giving away control is difficult. So I think juggling up those ideas is good, but also R&D. If you can't get R&D straight away, you can loan against that now. So again, there are creative ideas, grants. There are a lot of grants still not processed. So again, people should think about applying for these. Yes, it's arduous going through them, but it is free money. So
yeah. No, I think that's right. It's you don't want to give away X percentage of your business really, really early on when you realise the potential there, where you can ask for a lot more money for that equity somewhere down the road to really help you grow a lot bigger. Yeah. So
in summary, you've got to come and get good tax advice to structure you, get some R&D money and get some free money.
Yeah.
And ideally, hopefully, we'll give you enough documents to present a concise approach to investors, choose the right investors, and avoid problems in the future. We do hope you get in touch with us to have a free consultation. We must have worked on thousands of companies now, Stephen. We are very clear with clients, don't risk doing EIS without using Menzies. Don't go and taking an investment without looking at entrepreneurs relief. I've had clients who have lost thousands by rushing to the deal and not taking the advice. And there's a lot of times, and I know Stephen has actually turned around to clients and said, don't do it. And we've actually put the brakes on it and said, hang on, stop. Yes, it looks good money. The amount of tax and control involved, let's think about this. And we've had honest conversations with our clients, and I respect that.
Good. Good. It's been a pleasure working with you as well.
Well, look, everything's on the website for our clients. Hopefully they'll get in touch. And thank you, Steve, for joining me today.
Yeah,
a
thank you,
lovely
Karen.
sunny
Good
day, and
to
it's
speak
nice
to you
and
again.
hot.
Yeah.